G'day, welcome to Lunch Money. My name is Nick Samios. I am the Director and Fund Manager here at Hermes Capital. So welcome. As you know, Lunch Money is the online and social media home for workouts, special situations and capital raising professionals. And we have a couple of special situations, workouts and capital raising professionals to join us today. Just a quick reminder to anybody watching us live that question of the day gets the wonderful Lunch Money mug. It's a special rare edition, exclusive just to people who ask us questions whilst we're live. A reminder also to share, like or subscribe, whichever platform you might be watching us on, be it LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, wherever you are. Okay, what are we going to talk about today? Today, I want you to imagine there's a chorus every time I say this. What's noise and what matters? We're going to take a run through some of the news headlines this week, and there's some interesting topics to get through. And we're going to be asking every time we come up to one of these headlines, what's noise and what matters? Is it, whether it's China, the insolvency wall, the changes to the insolvency legislation, we're in recession, we're not in recession, responsible lending. We're going to see how much of all of these noisy headlines we can get to today. I'm going to start off by introducing our first guest, Stephen Hathway. G'day, Stephen. How are you?
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be here.
Now, Stephen is a director at Helm Advisory, but he's also the president of the AIIP. So what is it that keeps you busy with both of those hats this week?
Well, I guess every insolvency practitioner in Australia is scratching their head and saying, how is it in the middle of a recession that we're not busy? But extraordinary circumstances. What's keeping us busy is the new law reform, this new small business reconstruction practitioner role, whether it's even relevant, whether it even has a need, and the complexity of it. So that's keeping us going. I had a fairly interesting year as being the president of the AIIP. It's the Association of Independent Insolvency Practitioners. We've got about a third of the registered liquidators and trustees in Australia, and we get the chance to make submissions and do advocacy roles and run discussion groups. And that's been interesting, even though we couldn't hold any physical conferences, Zoom.
Zoom.
It's getting
Zoom, yeah.
Zoom for doom is that. Yeah. So that's it's not the appointments that are driving us. It's the need to clear the decks and be ready. We're all thinking that the next few months are certainly going to be more interesting in the last 6 or 7 or 8 months.
Yeah, I have to say, I mean, the finger in the dike can only go for so long. I mean, I can't imagine. I don't think there's anything the government can do to stop a wave of restructures, in the near future. I've been speaking to some people, and apparently the banks are sitting on a ton of stuff. Tell me, with the AIIP, I mean, there hasn't been a lot of engagement from the government with these new changes. I mean, I don't think they've spoken to any of the industry bodies.
No, that's not true. At the beginning of the year, we were even invited into the Ombudsman's room to talk about law reform. And this was before it started, the pandemic, this Kate Carnell. And we made a whole series of submissions. It was clear that they were after some simplification of the liquidation regime. And through the process, they throw out the bones to our organisations and other organisations in this space, associations. You know who all they are, I don't need to mention them. But whether they listen or not, you write these papers and you talk to them, but something in Canberra has their own bent on thinking that they're the ones that have got the solution. Not totally sure if they've got to understand the problems, but anyway, it's we'll see in the next month.
What changes would, I mean, how would it be tweaked? What do your members want to see in terms of tweaking that?
Look, you could run a seminar just on that. The details trickling out, there's a sort of a concept of a new registration, the criteria of which these things apply, Then there's this idea of being able to quickly report, certify, hold meetings, approve some scheme, hand the certificates back to the directors, keep trading. Look, the voluntary administration regime brought in 93 took years to think through properly. This one, has really got the chances of just being too quickly baked. My other take, and other insolvency practitioners, is that the damage has been done, and the zombies, most of them are possibly dead and just need to be deregistered. And the ones that have survived have got the dynamic managers that have a bit more capital behind them, and they probably won't need this sort of regime. There'll possibly be more CVLs with requiring a decent treatment of assets. And I'm not talking Phoenix here. I'm talking, proper valuations and processes to move those assets if they do need to be. Hiving down is an expression that other regimes have used. Nobody's supporting Phoenix, and that's not appropriate.
Well, as you know, the zombies or white walkers of this world like to prey on the flesh of the living. And I guess that's a concern, the contagion effect. But listen, we'll come back to that in a minute. I'll just put you back in the waiting room and introduce Daren Anderson, our other guest for today. G'day, Daren. How are you?
Good afternoon, Nick. I'm great, thank you.
Fantastic. Daren is the Managing Director at ERA Legal. And what's been keeping you busy of late, Daren?
Well, this week, gearing up for 2021. So, as Steve just mentioned, things have been inexplicably quiet in the middle of a recession, particularly in the insolvency realm. But I think things are really going to pick up come 1 January. I think there's going to be a flood of statutory demands coming out on the 1st of January or very close thereafter, when the 3-week period returns rather than having to wait 6 months. I think a lot of creditors who have been sitting on their recovery processes waiting for 1 January to come along, and I think we're going to get a flood, and that there'll be a lot of work in that in terms of issuing statutory demands, but also applying to set aside statutory demands, and also giving advice to companies in distress who have received statutory demand. So I think that's going to keep us very busy.
So are you preparing these demands now? Are you getting clients contacting you and saying, here's a list of stuff that's got to go out on the 1st of Jan?
I've got a lot of statutory demands locked and loaded and ready to go on the 1st of January.
Right.
So
and your colleagues are the same? Other lawyers that you speak to around town?
I haven't been speaking to many lawyers around town about that issue particularly, but I can tell you I've got about $10 million in statutory demands ready to go on 1 January. So, and I anticipate, and we're not a creditor-driven practice. We're an insolvency reconstruction practice, and the practices that are creditor-driven will have a lot more than 10 million ready to go, I think. And also gearing up our lending practice for 2021. For a number of non-bank lenders, Hermes, of course, being one of them. And in the 12 months before COVID hit us, we did roughly $1.2 billion in loans out of ERA Legal for our private lender clients. And in the first 7 months of COVID, we did 50 million. Which was a massive drop. And in the last 6 weeks, we've done about 100 million. So things are starting to pick up. So we're quite excited about that, and I think the private lending market will be back on track come early 2021. So we're quite excited about that, and quite excited about how things are going to pick up.
Okay. All right. Well, look, I'll bring back Stephen Hathway. Okay. Now let's. We've got a bunch of different articles. I thought I'd take the news article headline approach today because it gives us a good framework for getting through some interesting topics. The first one I've got is the collapse of Grollo. We had Grocon. There's obviously lots of entities within the Grocon empire, and a bunch of those went into voluntary administration earlier in the week, or was it early this week? After there was some consternation as to whether or not it actually happened, and there was some chatter on social media. I don't necessarily want to talk specifically about Grocon. I guess I do want to start. My first question is this noise, or does this matter? Is this, do you think, just a one-off event, or is this the beginning of the insolvency wave? Daren?
It may be the beginning of the insolvency wave. My view has been that builders are probably going to be one of the industries that come out of the crisis we've been in better than most, because the government's supporting the building industry, and I think they're going to come out of it better than most industries. But the issue about I think Grollo was no one was surprised about Grocon's financial difficulties. I think the only surprise might have been that some of these companies haven't done things sooner. Because the opportunity that companies have had to restructure in an insolvency context over the last 6 months are unprecedented. And the thing that has surprised me most is that large companies like Grocon haven't grasped the opportunity sooner, which I've been very surprised about. But I don't know whether we're going to see a lot of big companies restructuring. The opportunity that opportunity has been presented for a long time. So.
Well, I guess before there's some other interesting details to talk about there, but one of the first things that when I first heard about it was there was a query as to whether or not FTI were going to get the job, or whether or not it was going to be KordaMentha. I think was it FTI was favoured by, or I think KordaMentha was favoured by the bank, and FTI was favoured by the directors. Stephen, do you think are we going to see more of these standoffs between insolvency firms on some of these bigger jobs, do you think, coming into the insolvency cliff?
Look, when a big organisation like this is needing to appoint, there's always the beauty pageant that used to take place. The players that were around in the 80s and 90s, some of them had their name changed, of course, they've evolved into it. But if they've been marketing in that space to the bankers, that type of activity is normal. And of course, it's usually heralded that people have a general idea of the stress that some of those big companies are under. And it's never completely out of the blue. There's defaults on payment. They usually got some issue going on in the courts, and this is surprising. They've got an issue going on with the state government here in New South Wales. So you go back to concrete construction days, I think there was a separate list up there in the Supreme Court just for them alone. So fighting your creditors and fighting issues in the building industry is not unreal. I just wanted to pick up, I think that the building industry is just more than just the big end of town. My observations are that if you've got a government contract, you're pretty safe. If you're out there building the new airport in Sydney or the transport links, the state government's not going to not pay you. You've got to be within your budget. But even if you're not in your budget, they still seem to pay because of the contracts, like the light rail. Then there's also regional builders too. I don't know if the viewers have ventured outside Sydney, or maybe they are coming into Sydney, but a lot of the country towns, the builders are flat out. You try getting a painter or a brickie in Tamworth, Dubbo, Gunnedah, the real estate, the decentralising of our life, earlier retirements, the fact you can live from home, has brought around an extraordinary period of growth. So it used to be, look, if a big builder went down in the 80s and 90s, the flow-on effect would be through the subbies. But this is not like anything else we've ever seen. So pockets of it, there'll be suffering. Apartments, going to struggle, but residential real estate seems to go up, and if the papers are.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, I mean, I could start on a 4-hour rant about money printing and asset inflation. We won't go down that path today. And look, I think there is a lot of this, JobKeeper and support that's ending up in house renovations. But Stephen, one of the other headlines related to this Grollo matter, if we can just flash it up, I think it was in the paper today. So Grocon were terminated, I think it was by impact, on a very large project in Melbourne. And I think that my understanding is that Grollo was hoping to sort of quarantine that project away from all of the other entities that were going into administration. I don't know if that project was, it was one of the companies that administration was conducting, or another company in his group, but he had been hoping to quarantine it. And Impact have said, well, it was in the paper today. Impact apparently have said, well, you're asking us to fund, this job, but there's still subbies that haven't been paid. So that opens up two lines of questioning. The first one is, I think there will be a domino effect, don't you think? Stephen?
Well, depends on the contracts. It may be that the government can, or the government can go in and underwrite the subbies and get the job done. There'll be other builders needing to complete these projects. Lend lease there'll be other capable builders of that scale to take up the projects. You can't have a building uncompleted. It's just got to get itself done. And it's not always that you leave these people out. Now, given this, I know you say don't talk about it, but this unprecedented flooding of the system with money. If you were in Melbourne and you went into Andrew's job, thinking of the Premier's name.
Daniel Andrews.
Office and said there's jobs involved. There'd be a government handout of some sort. If you were yelling at Josh Frydenberg, protect the industry here, there'd be another writing of a few checks. It's unprecedented the amount of money they're flooding into the system. It's making the Rudd-Gillard years look like tuck shop money compared to what they're doing now. So it may be that the governments want these buildings completed. They need to keep the jobs rolling. They don't want massive standoffs. It's not like the old days. So
Okay, well, Daren, just to put you on the spot a little bit, I know that you don't write every word of the Herald, the famous ERA newsletter, but there was an article in there this week about specifically about the construction industry. There are a couple of things. I mean, there are these issues where, for example, a head contractor can step over, like say if it's a government project, they can, or Impact, for example, could step over Grollo and pay the subbies direct if they want, except Impact is saying that they've already paid for the work completed, right? So Impact saying, well, we've paid for that, but the subbies haven't been paid yet.
Sorry, are you saying Impact paid the subbies directly? Is that?
No. In this matter, Impact is saying, well, we've already paid Grocon for the work, but the subbies haven't been paid, which is not an uncommon scenario.
Yeah, the problem you always find in an insolvency context that when that occurs on a building site is the union getting involved, and notwithstanding that the developer may have paid the builder and the subbies haven't got paid, it's always creating issues with the unions. But I would take, I think it's quite a complex issue with that termination of that building contract in Melbourne. You've always got to scratch your head and query as whether Impact uses it as an opportunity to get itself out of the building contract, particularly if Grocon was set up ready to complete the project. Query whether the insolvency fell into the hands of Impact to allow them to cut a better deal. I'm not suggesting that's the case, but it's something you can scratch your head and ask a question about.
Let me just very quickly, does the CFMEU still have that inflatable rat? Remember the inflatable rat? you remember that one, Daren?
Yeah. I'd assume they probably still have it.
Yeah, it turned up on
I think
on one of my clients. Yeah,
I think they had a few of them.
Yeah, that was that. Yeah, it was kind of funny for some. Look, another thing I might ask you, Stephen. One of the things that appeared in one of these newspaper articles about Grollo was, where is it? Apparently, he hadn't signed a solvency resolution, and you have to sign this solvency resolution within 2 months, maybe of the end of financial year. It's part of a thing that companies have to do every year, but evidently he had not signed this solvency resolution. I don't know exactly what the impact of that is. Do you think there's many companies floating out there of this size that haven't signed their annual solvency resolutions for ASIC?
I've picked that up in some of the papers as well, that the number of even listed companies on the Australian stock market is close. Look, I don't. What I did think was interesting in this. Normally, you go to the news and say, right, I've appointed. But they didn't do that. They said, we're going to appoint, or we have appointed, we've passed the resolutions, and then everyone asked, well, who did you appoint? And I think it took a week, if not a week, 5 business days, to then work out, well, which of the administrators finally got it. So I don't think there's any rules about that. You just got to make sure you're not trading in that period. I think trading claim, but yeah. Apart from that, it seems a bit strange. Maybe they were still doing their beauty contest with the big players to say what sort of deal. And my other observation is that's an extraordinarily low number of companies for something like that. There must be other companies in that group. Haven't done the searches, don't bother to do them, but I'd be a bit surprised that there'd be over 100, 200 companies of that sort of building company, and they've only put, 36 in. Whether they've saved some or they're just not applicable, but I'm not even sure that they've got the whole shooting game for growth on.
Well, I think we may have seen another domino fall today if Impact have walked out. Listen, I want to move on from this, but there are 2 very quick points I wanted to get to, Daren. So this, Stephen's talked about the process of appointing the administrators. And I know, I got the gossipy SMS. Have you heard that Grocon have gone? Who got the job? It was FTI. No, it wasn't. It was Cordamentha. And I think what was going on there, because Grollo was on social media announcing it. And my feeling is that he was trying to strong-arm the New South Wales government. So without going into the specifics there, I wonder if that's a tactic that we're going to see with, people sort of publicly threatening administration. I mean, so usually that sort of thing goes on behind closed doors. But is this a new trend as well, Daren?
I've never been a fan of running your insolvency case or your litigation in the media or trying to strong-arm people with threats or trying to get the press on side. I just don't think it works, and I think it's a pretty weak argument. I think threats, if you're going to make threat, you need to follow through on. So if they think they were going to strong arm the New South Wales government by running some press campaign, that I think they were very sad to find the result was not what they had expected.
All right, well, look, we'll move on to our next headline. Okay, Rockpool Dining Group slides to $80 million loss as COVID closures bite. Now, my query here is, now obviously this is a historical, this is a looking back figure where they've lost money, over a recent period, and we can understand why with restaurant closures. $80 million strikes me as being an awful lot of money for a restaurant group. But my query is, this talk of us being out of recession, is that just noise, Daren?
Well, we'll just talk about the restaurants. My understanding is very few restaurants, particularly high-end restaurants, make money. So I wouldn't be worried about the Rockpool group per se, whether it's in COVID or out of COVID. I have serious concerns about, however, the restaurant industry in Victoria, particularly the small operators, how they're going to cope over the next 12 months, even when they've got people back in their restaurants, how they're going to cope with the fact that they haven't had income for the last 6 months. You know, they're going to have their mortgages backed up. They're going to be dealing with landlords. They're going to be dealing with a whole array of issues. And what is the relief, or what are the plans to help those cafes out, small mum and dad cafe owners who borrowed money against their mortgage to buy a cafe in Melbourne and we're doing a great job, and then we're out of the businesses for 6 months? What are we going to do about that over the next 24 months? I think that's going to be where the big issue is in small hospitality. I really worry and sad for those people, because they were running good businesses, working very hard, and through absolutely no fault of their own, probably really no fault of anybody in particular, their lives have been ruined. That's going to be the real issue.
What do you think, Stephen? I mean, are you buying it that we're out of a recession? I mean, it seems odd to be sort of chirping about being out of recession when we're probably about to face, record insolvencies.
Look, Daren, you're on point with your observations about the damage done. Some businesses are mortally wounded, bleeding at the knee, and they don't know it yet. If you go back to 2007 and 8, when the damage was done in the financial markets, the insolvency industry was running hot for 3 or 4 years, 5 years after that. People would walk in and said, we just couldn't get our balance sheets back again and we needed to have it resolved. Some of the damage is not always obvious at the time, but it's crept in, and a whole lot of behavioural things have taken place in this pandemic that need to be really thought through. The academic world is, what's that mean? Are we going to get the Chinese students back, all the industries that are around them? What sort of industry are we going to have in that education space? So the damage is done. The comment about high-end catering or dining has always been tricky. It's such a high expense, and number of celebrity chefs, you could Google it, that usually go broke every 10 years. And it's not surprising not getting that sort of money being spent in their restaurants. But extraordinarily, things like even my little street that I've got an office on, Carrington Street, another restaurant's opened up in the last month, and another one's renovated, and incidentally one's closed. So it's the evolution of what we see in every city. We look back over a number of decades of us coming and going down the streets of Sydney. Many businesses come and go. Sure. I don't think that we're seeing the end of this. And look, the government crowing about return of productivity, really. I mean, you're pumping so much money in there, and to brag that some sort of growth numbers have come back. You can't.
I appreciate that they've got to try and tell us everything's all right. They don't want to. I guess it's the old thing about you don't want to talk too much doom and gloom, because then people don't want to get out of bed in the morning. But Stephen, I'll start with you and then I'll come to you, Daren. One thing that I'm sure you've often seen as an insolvency practitioner is you've done a restructure, you've taken the client through the voluntary administration process, they've come out at the other end under a deed of company arrangement. In other words, they've made a deal with all of their creditors. And you're hoping, they got into that mess for a particular reason. And then sometimes what they want to do is, even though the deed of company arrangement was for the creditors to get 15 cents in the dollar, they suddenly go, they say, oh, look, I really want to pay this person 100 cents and that person 100 cents. And it's almost like, you've gone to all that trouble to restructure the business, but then they're dragging out the sins of the past and revisiting on the new entity. You've seen that sort of thing, and how are we going to encourage people to take their medicine once and for all this time around?
Gosh, we all knew that answer. The world of denial and the world of just making people make hard decisions has always been there. If you can get them in the room and you get a decent deal, and you're able to save the business, have they learned any from them? Lucky in my career, I've had no reoccurring business with some people, and behold, the phone will ring and say, remember me? And it might have been 10 or 15 years ago, they're walking in again because it's all blown up. No, I don't think there's never one easy fix in an answer to those sorts of questions. Everything's got its... Some businesses, of course, some industries, of course, are completely and utterly changed. And no matter how much jigging around the business, the business is just falling apart. Look, you can talk about retail. The last sales day was a record moving of parcels in the 120-year Australia Post history. So what's that mean? Massive number of people buying online. They're consuming, but they're not walking into the shops. They're doing it all outside the shop.
Let's see if it lasts.
How does it impact the value of shops?
Yeah. What do you think on that question, Daren? Of we've all seen it where the company, they've restructured. Everybody's done. The administrators have done a lot of hard work to get it done, but then they just either fall back into their old habits or they try and drag some of the old debt into the new company.
The problem is that the plan hasn't been sorted out correctly from the start. Now there are fabulous opportunities going 2021 for companies to work with professional insolvency practitioners, their lawyer, their accountant, and a financier like Hermes who knows about restructuring and recapitalising businesses through a restructure process. Yeah, that's why VAs fail. They fail because they're sold by a particular person, often a pre-insolvency advisor as a panacea. The plan's not sorted through properly. The banks aren't brought on board, and a refinancier isn't in the mix from the start. Unless you've got a plan coming out and a proper recapitalisation plan, it's not going to work. But there are plenty of opportunities if people start thinking about it and working with the right professionals and the right financiers about coming out the other end. The restructure will work. Yeah. That's what needs to happen. People need to see people who are really interested in seeing businesses come out the other end and survive and thrive. There are some businesses that VAs aren't right for because the businesses are really just finished. They are zombies, but there are plenty of opportunities to restructure businesses that have been hurt and can come out the other end as viable and profitable.
Yeah, I mean, my advice to people would be whoever you choose to be your advisor, you need a team, and you need to ask everyone on that team, have you done this before, and can you point me to 3 success stories? Where you've actually if your team is a pre-insolvency advisor and a insolvency practitioner, and that is all that your team consists of, you've only got half the team. Yeah. All right. Well, listen, we'll try and get to one more headline before we wrap up. What's the next one we've got here? Okay, now this is an interesting one. Pull lending laws into line with Wagyu and Shiraz. So the Treasurer announced a little while ago that they were going to more or less scrap the responsible lending laws. The responsible lending obligations came in during the GFC. Wayne Swan brought in these regulations to, I personally think it was a response to an American problem, not an Australian problem. But the idea was to put more responsibility on the bank to make sure that people could fulfill their obligations. And it was aimed at consumers. It wasn't aimed at small business. But the trouble is that the banks, certainly these obligations transferred through to small business. And I personally think that it crimped the ability of small businesses to raise capital. I mean, what do you think, Daren? You see a lot of action in this space. Do you think that they should peel the laws back, or do you think they should stay as they are?
Well, firstly, can I say my heart bleeds for the big 4 banks. Bleeds for them. Prince Harry apparently said last night that COVID was nature's revenge. One might think that COVID might have been conjured up by the big banks in order to avoid the consequences of the Royal Commission. But
sounds like you're coming across to my side, Daren.
Responsible lending. I think the Royal Commission for the banks was a good thing. I think the banks needed a shake-up. They really needed a shake-up to let the people who got out of hand understand that some of their practices weren't on. But is it really APRA and the government regulation, or is that just something that the banks are telling us because they want the government to really go back to the days where there's no regulation whatsoever? So I think it's a political game being played in the background.
Right. Okay.
And so I'm not quite sure that you can believe what you read. I think the banks want to lend, they will lend.
Yeah.
I think my personal view is that it's a bit of a beat up.
Yeah, it's interesting. Martin North calls JobKeeper bank keeper. So that sort of fits in there.
I think the big issue, Nick, sorry, I thought the big issue is if we were going to have a minute or two on it is about what's happening with China. I think that's really
right. Okay, sure. Yeah, go for it. Go. Well, let's just quickly show the headline on China. And the headline on China is coming right up. Okay, so it's obviously impacted heavily on the wine sector. With people now talking about, although I understand yesterday there was a global campaign around the world for people to buy Aussie wines, but I don't think we can pull that out for every little thing. What do you think?
What I want to know is when are we going to understand that we are part of Asia, not part of America and not part of Europe? Like Paul Keating was trying to educate us back in the 80s that we were part of Asia and not part of America, not part of Europe. But for some reason, we still think we're part of America or part of Europe. And if we don't start dealing with China and showing it the respect that it needs to be shown, then these things are going to keep happening. This will decimate the wine industry.
What do you think, Stephen? I mean, there's showing respect, and there's deference, I suppose. What are your thoughts? And do you think it's going to impact on insolvency?
Oh, look, today's paper's got iron ore prices at $140, and we're making more money out of the Chinese on a month-by-month basis. So these little sprats. Look, I support the idea that we do. Belong in Asia, and we should be dealing with trading. There's some extraordinary economies at our doorstep. Indonesia, for example, 300 million, all trying to slowly get into the middle class. That's likely to be buying our wines. There's other countries, Thailand, Malaysia. We sometimes, it's just difficult to know. There's so much chatter in this space. And to ask the Chinese to apologise, I mean, we've just got to listen to them a bit harder and try to work with them.
Can I just say this? Good luck in getting Australia. Good luck in getting Australians to drink Yellowtail. It's a bit like getting Australians to drink Foster's beer. So if the recovery is going to be about getting Australians to buy and drink Yellowtail, that's not going to be the way through the recovery.
Well, you look for other markets. You look for other emerging markets. You've got to always be looking for. If anyone running a business, you're always looking around for different customers. You just shouldn't just focus all on one country and one deal. We all know that. The old eggs in one basket was the old statement you'd make. So you diversify your income.
All right, guys. Listen, we are out of time. So I would like to thank you both for joining me on this, which was episode 37, and it's also our last full-scale episode for the year. We are going to keep a weekly show going, but it's going to be just 10 to 15-minute episodes one-on-one. I think we're going to call it Lunch Money Quick Bites over the summertime. So thank you very much, Stephen Hathway and Daren Anderson. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode. It's been really interesting.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you.
We'll duck off and have a little sip of glass of Yellowtail.
No worries. Okay, thank you very much. Cheers. Bye-bye.